But I do think that profession, that word profession, I've found that the word profession itself can be challenging for acupuncturists. It evokes aesthetic ideas, first and foremost, but also just ideas about how one conducts oneself and how one approaches one's profession that I think folks don't like as much. Guild, I think, suggests a community, and it also suggests apprenticeship.
I'm Michael Max, and this is Geological. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and the question was floated by as to if the capitalist system was inherently flawed and the source of disparity and greed. The guest on the show, a businessman, so do consider the source here, said that economic systems have their strengths and their weaknesses. But as to greed, that is a human problem. Hearing that podcast guest play the issue of greed, not in the outer world, but in the human heart, that felt right. I suspect greed arises every bit as easily as does envy, especially when we are comparing ourselves to others. And that does seem to be a central tenet of the human enterprise. I've found that having a practice, in essence, running a small business, has been helpful in getting a better glimpse into my own values, behavior, and where I'm not living up to my higher expectations for myself. It's easy to blame the troubles of the world on those evil business people, but when I'm cutting corners in my own business, if I'm marketing in ways that I feel shoddy, if I'm saving money by buying from Amazon instead of the local business down the street, then I have to square those behaviors with my vision for how I'd like to see the world unfold. I know that a lot of us have issues with business, money, and marketing. Some of that is due to not having a firm grasp of business fundamentals. Imagine practicing medicine without a grasp of the basics. Not really possible, is it? And yet, have you decided that effectively running a business is bad just because you don't understand it? That would be like deciding medicine is not worthwhile just because you don't understand it. And I suspect that if you have been able to learn medicine, then learning the basics of business shouldn't be such a big hurdle. It just takes some time and attention and perhaps an update on attitude. I think small business is one of the greatest forces for good on the planet. You get to work out of your own value system and create local change that benefits your community. You have an opportunity to choose the companies and suppliers that you use, and over time, this has an impact, especially if you are choosing to support other small businesses. You get to vote with your money and ethics every day and make a living to boot, and it helps people. Running a business is a good thing, and don't let anyone tell you anything different. It gives you the freedom to do whatever you want and not have to ask someone else's permission. It allows you an opportunity to create your vision for the world that you want to live in. It holds up to you a mirror that every day asks if you're acting in accord with your values or not. Running a business will teach you the difference between price and value. It will give you plenty of opportunities to develop your courage and your fortitude, to notice where you make self-limiting excuses for yourself, and allow you to develop clear boundaries so that you know what you stand for and what you don't. Running a business will reveal your hubris. It will show you where you're not living up to your ideals. It will dependably point you towards your blind spots and unceasingly ask you to be authentic with your ethics. And so everything that you learn about running a business translates into being a better practitioner, because you'll be more reliable and trustworthy as you'll have a fuller measure of who you are in the vast marketplace of interaction. You know how we think that cultivation is an essential element of being a practitioner of Chinese medicine? Your business is part of that cultivation. I wouldn't say that running a business is easy, but I'd say that it is worthwhile. And furthermore, it truly will hold up that mirror that will reflect back to you your limits, fears, and flaws, which in turn can help with getting a handle on those human tendencies toward envy and greed, because no one likes doing business with greedy business people. Running a business and practicing medicine share the need to be attentive to the present moment and have a sense of how nature unfolds in its cycles of generativity and decline. In a moment, we're going to sit down for a conversation with Eric Gray, who's given a lot of thought to the principles of business and the importance of community in the practice of medicine. But first, I want to thank all of you for listening right now, because you are the community that makes Geological possible. And while we are a far-flung and diverse family of practitioners, these conversations unite us in our thirst to know more about medicine and our appreciation of the methods and perspectives that allow us to help others. All right, enough jawboning about all that. Let's get into some business with Eric Gray. These conversations come to you through the generous support of our sponsors and members. Blue Poppy, your new one-stop shop, has speedy shipping options on everything that you need for your clinic. It's Women's Health Month at Mayway Herbs. Check out the new website for learning resources on helping women with herbal medicine. Are you a creature of habit? How about making a change that helps your patients and the planet with AccuFast needles? And later in the show, raising your fees doesn't have to be a difficult process. Jane has helpful suggestions on making it easy and effective. And finally, have you considered that having a thriving, profitable practice is one of the most healing things that you can do? Julie Bear Don't Walk has, and she can help you do something about it too. Do be sure to visit the sponsors page on the Geological website to take advantage of all the special offers our terrific sponsors have for listeners of the podcast. Picture this. Your clinic is buzzing with patients, and then you realize that you're down to your last box of needles. No need for panic, because Blue Poppy, your one-stop shop for all your acupuncture needs, they ship orders received before 3 p.m. on the same day. With a quick visit to Blue Poppy's website, you can order premium needles, herbal formulas, and that special Dr. Bob's oil that your patients love. Blue Poppy understands practitioners can't keep patients waiting. That's why they strive to get you what you need when you need it. From high-quality Chinese herbs and formulations to acupuncture supplies and clinical essentials, Blue Poppy has served practitioners for nearly 40 years with products that meet the highest of standards. Discover everything Blue Poppy has to offer by visiting www.bluepoppy.com, and don't forget to subscribe to their mailing list for exclusive offers and more.
Hi folks, I'm Yvonne Lau, president of Mayway Herbs. May is Women's Health Month, and as a women-owned and women-run business, we especially love how Chinese medicine can support wellness through every stage of a woman's life. So in this month's newsletter and podcast, we're covering topics like PMS, pregnancy, menopause, and osteoporosis. We'll share expert insights and effective treatment strategies you can put to good use in your clinic. Our Plumflower brand line includes herbal tea pills, tablets, extract granules, and organic herbs, all of which you can find on Mayway.com, and where you can also find articles, videos, and other resources to support your practice. Since 1969, Mayway has been a trusted source for high-quality herbal products. In these challenging times, please know that we remain committed to keeping our products accessible and affordable so you can take care of yourself and your patients. As always, thank you for supporting Real Chinese Medicine.
Daily habits and routines feel comforting, familiar, easy, automatic. That's the power of repetition. You've worked out the kinks and can do it with your eyes closed. But what if you shook things up? What if you ditched the old routine and tried something new? Hi, I'm John Sten. I've practiced acupuncture for over 30 years, and together with my wife Kelly, we created the world's first eco-friendly acupuncture needle. The AccuFast earth-friendly needle system cuts your packaging waste by 60 to 90%, depending upon your needle type, speeds up your needling, gives you more control, and best of all, while you're healing patients, we plant a tree for every 2 boxes your clinic uses. Thousands of acupuncturists have already made the switch. In just the last year, they've helped plant over 16,000 trees. Since we started, that number has grown to over 50,000. So break the routine. Be the change. Visit AccuFastNeedles.com. Your patients and the planet will thank you.
Eric Gray, welcome to Geological.
I'm very happy to be here with you.
Happy to have you here. So we were talking on the phone recently, and I kind of wish I'd had the tape running back then, because we just were coming across such great thoughts and ideas about running a practice, or as you were talking about it, having a successful, resonant, and enjoyable professional life. I loved that idea that we're talking about having basically an awesome and a great professional life.
Yeah.
So much falls under that rubric of what it means to be a professional and what it means to have a professional life. Usually people get caught up in like, I got to do business. And then whatever we think about business now inhabits our thoughts and we freak out. But thinking about having a professional life, that's the journey of decades.
Yeah. I mean, hopefully for the rest of your life, right? That's at least that's what I hoped for when I got into this profession. But yeah, I mean, I think the reason I use that terminology, I think, is because teaching at NUMNM, the later classes, the more recent ones, a lot of those folks came in not really being sure they wanted to be in private practice. And that was a change for me in my teaching. Earlier on, of course, everybody was like private practice. They were going to have their own thing. And then they were going to have a retreat center. That was like the pipeline.
Yeah. But, back then there wasn't really a choice.
Exactly.
That's right. If you're going to be an acupuncturist, you're going to be in private practice because there weren't any JOBs.
Yeah. And there was no professional diversification such that there were other options available, such as going into allied product industries or becoming a scholar or creating a business to business type of a situation, right? There weren't a lot of options. And so I saw it as a positive thing, but it did make me have to change my teaching because I wanted to speak more to the container of one's career and one's professional life of which private practice could be a part of it, and seeing patients could be a part of it, but it may not be all of it. But we can use kind of the principles that we learn in school and, those traditions still to root us, whether we're in practice or, doing something else, typesetting books or whatever it is that we're doing.
Exactly. I like how you just listed off that there's a number of different things that could be a part of your professional life. You could be a scholar, you could be a writer, you could have a business to business type business. Maybe you're selling products to other acupuncturists.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of things like that. What got you all interested in this? A lot of folks that just want to get credentialed and go to work sticking pins in people.
It's kind of a reflex I have. Anything I get into, I'm always, I started this profession. Before I started this profession, I was going to be a philosophy professor, and the philosophy, I was more in ethics, and I really got into kind of professional ethics, and got me really interested in just how kind of guilds, right, and professional kind of categories and all they entail, how they evolve and how they interact and what they mean for the people that are involved in them. There's kind of specific philosophical roots to why I'm so interested in it. But as soon as I got into Chinese medicine, it was apparent that this was a profession in flux, like a profession that was in development, in an early and kind of rapid stage of development. I had studied biomedicine in my first graduate degree, and really looking at the history and the philosophy of the evolution of that profession. And so when I came right into Chinese medicine from that, and so it was like, wow, I'm coming into a profession that is at a place that biomedicine hasn't been at for a little bit. And all those things that I learned I'm seeing them play out. I'm seeing how this professional diversification happens. I'm seeing how, the tension between the old guard and the new guard starts to develop and what that creates. And so it was just kind of like a fascination from the very beginning. And then when I started teaching business, it was like, this is immediately applicable. Like I can use this to make my teaching more useful to these folks who are graduating at a time that for me is it's a watershed moment in our profession.
It is a moment of tremendous change. And I think tremendous opportunity, which also means often that there's a lot of difficulty, there's a lot of upheaval, things in flux. Things in flux can be like, cool, things in flux. How can I interact with this system that's very flexible at the moment? Or you can look at it as things in flux. Nowhere solid to stand. It kind of depends on the personality you have and the perspectives that you have. I have heard other people on the podcast talk about Chinese medicine as applied philosophy.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting hearing you come from a philosophical background, looking at ethics, looking at how you use the word guild.
Yeah.
Tell me more about that.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so full disclosure, I was a big D&D nerd. Okay, I am a big D&D nerd. And super into when I was younger, I did like a lot of Renaissance festivals, and like I was very into that vibe. So I will just say I have an aesthetic preference for words like guild as opposed to profession. It has a little panache. But I do think that that word profession, I've found that the word profession itself can be challenging for acupuncturists that I've been teaching, because it evokes aesthetic ideas first and foremost, but also just ideas about how one conducts oneself, and how one approaches one's profession, that I think folks don't like as much. Guild, I think, suggests a community, and it also suggests apprenticeship. Right. It suggests what I think is true, which is that none of us gets very good at this medicine without having a direct connection to a lineage or a teacher that we truly resonate with on a deep level. And so I think that's different than the word profession doesn't quite evoke that for me. So I always just think of it as guilds.
I like the word guild myself, partly for the same reasons that you do. It's got a kind of panache, but it also suggests a kind of group that is cohesive. I mean, of course, there's going to be plenty of diversity, but it's cohesive in a way. And there's something about the way that you bring new people into it. And there's something about the way that you take care of each other when you're in a guild.
For sure. Yeah, and there's a shared cultural reference, right? There's often in that concept of guild, right? I always think, there's colors, there's banners, right? And so those things can become tribal and bad, right? Like that can become a force for division. But I think within the group, and hopefully in the best cases, it actually becomes a force of unity and a force of having shared visions, and that is a problem that I've seen in our profession. That there's just a lot of diversity in ideas about where we're going and what this medicine is about and how it ought to be practiced and how it ought to be licensed and all that kind of stuff. And so I feel like the kind of guild concept, there is a sort of coming together in community for mutual support in a way that it doesn't mean that you squash down other opinions. It doesn't mean that everybody steps in lockstep, but it does mean that there's kind of a shared idea of who we are and what we're doing. So I find that an evocative idea.
Mm-hmm. Well, you bring up the word diversity, and of course, diversity is a very, very in the news. It's in the forefront of a lot of people's minds right now. Diversity is a wonderful thing, especially when you think about it in terms of an ecosystem. The strongest, most vibrant, stable ecosystems are incredibly diverse.
Certainly.
So there's that. It's really helpful to have diversity and many different points of view. The challenge of diversity is how do you include other people within our domain of practice who maybe think and practice very, very differently.
Yeah.
Let me give you an example, right? So you've got people that think the idea of a very successful practice is I sell a bunch of packages and I see 50 people a day. I just rock it. And absolutely, you can work that way. And then you got people on the other end of the spectrum that are working out of their house or a little place in the back, whatever. They see 10 people a day. They've got ridiculously low overhead. And that works for them.
Yeah.
All ecosystems have lots of different kinds of critters. Some of them actually eat each other.
Yeah, and that's the real truth. Because you and I had talked a lot about community, the concept of community, and how do we sustain community and all those kinds of things. And I was thinking about that and just contemplating the kinds of questions that might come up. And one of the things I did think about is we do have to hold space as people who are excited about a community, about community cohesion. You have to hold space for the fact that not everybody's going to want to be part of the community. Right. And not everybody's going to fit. And that sometimes there are people who eat each other. Being in community does not imply a placid lake with no ripples and no adjustment and no movement. It's a dynamic thing, and it's always in flux. So yeah, I mean, you mentioned one type of diversity, but even things like there's all these discussions in our medicine, even things like, I mean, even something as simple as a person who does kind of trigger point style acupuncture, right? And they would even say like it's a very physical level treatment, and very aggressive and very intense. And then on the other side, chi needling, or like
Exactly.
tuning forks and
Yes.
and whatever. And that is not just a question of tools. Often there's a lot more that comes along with that, and sometimes those things do clash. So yeah, I think it's warring states, man. It's like this cacophony. It's this cacophony of diversity of opinion and sometimes aggression. But to me, it's like it's exciting, and it means that we're actively trying to create something that I feel will have lasting power and effective power in the world. We can't shy away from it.
It's only been here in the United States for 50-ish years ish. I mean, well, within the let's call it mainstream community. Of course, within the Chinese communities, it's been here much longer, but within more mainstream consensus, whatever you want to call the reality we're living in, it's fairly new, and it is exciting to see such a diversity of thought, of practice. And one of the things that I found when I was in school, I was reading the Nanjing, because we had to read the Nanjing. We had the Unschuld version. It has all the footnotes and all the commentaries, things Talmudic and how it's written. And I would watch the doctors over the centuries discussing a certain difficulty, and they were arguing with each other over centuries. Not just like in the present moment, like we do because we're humans and we're living in a diverse environment. We have differences of opinion. These guys were arguing across centuries. Like, you do this, you'll kill your patient, it'll be your fault.
Right.
And other guys like, no, that guy's full of beans, So part of that cacophony that you talk about, I think, is like the fuel and the juice for understanding what this medicine actually is. Because we have this very basic set of principles, and yet they can unfold in a myriad of ways.
Indeed. Yeah. And of course it's in constant evolution now, and just given the huge number of people on Earth and the differentiation just in our social environment and our political environments, there's always like new frontiers that this medicine is approaching, different communities it's going into, different methods of administration, different containers. And of course, that's going to bring up new questions, things like when you do, acupuncture 50 people a day, for instance, and especially 50 people a day, not in a big group acupuncture environment, right? Like I do know, folks, and I'm sure you do too, who do legit see, 40 or 50 solo patients running 4 rooms or whatever it is. What is that? What is different about that as opposed to what I do sitting down with a patient for 60 or 90 minutes, getting down into the minutia of their symptoms to prescribe an herbal remedy, right? Like what are the different kind of structures we need in our educational institutions for those two, you know what I mean? Like those are two very different ways of being in practice. And what needs to happen in our professional ecosystem to be supportive of both of those means of practice and all of the diverse shades in between, right?
Yes.
I think it's a huge conundrum for me.
And you just mentioned schools. Is this actually the domain of schools to look at this, or is this the domain of people as they come out into the world and begin their professional life and figure out where they want to go, that these conversations come from those of us that are in practice and discovering what practice means to us?
Sure. I think that's certainly true. I think I'm thinking more that, for instance, there's schools, that do the basic education in 3 years, right? And that the focus of the school is really acupuncture, right? That herbs is a little bit of a side note, and the understanding in many of these schools is that if you really want to do herbalism, you'll do some advanced training after you graduate, which I think works fine. But that's a very specific model of education. And the school I went to, right, one of the largest curricula in the country, just gigantic, beyond. Like looking back at how many classes I took, I laugh. I don't know how I survived it. But It was an incredibly robust education. And there were people in my year who it chafed them that they had to take all these extra classes about herbs and about all this stuff that was not to them applicable to what they wanted to do, which was see huge numbers of acupuncture patients. So I guess that's what I'm saying, is that this diversity, I think, just naturally creates a differentiation. It may be 10 years, 20 years, 30 years down the road from where we are now. But I think we should, and hopefully will, see that there emerges some more specialized training. But you're right. I mean, a lot of this happens after practice, right? Like you get out, you start practicing, and you say to yourself, actually, this works really well, and I really enjoy doing this, but I don't so much enjoy that. And you start engaging with that.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, I think it can happen in both places. I think I have a bias having taught at a university for 10 years. So I always think that schools have a part to play,
Mm-hmm. So given that so much happens after we get our learner's permit, aka acupuncture license, we're out in the world, so much of that learning happens then. What is the role of the schools in helping to prepare students so that when they get out in the world, they've got some capacity for like learning how to learn or knowing what they need next? You can't teach everything in 3 to 5 years of school. Ideally in school, you get enough basic skills, and then you get something about learning how to learn.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. And I also think something that I always endeavored to do because I taught in first, second, third, and fourth year. So I got to touch into their education all along the way. And during the first year, one of the things that was most important to me was to give them a sense of what the profession is. Because I think people don't remember that when you first come into this profession, you may have had acupuncture one time. I had never had acupuncture or Chinese herbs at all before I came into this profession. So I came in having literally...
What on earth drew you to it? Most people have had experience. You had none of it.
Magic. No, it was total. Yeah, that's another story. But let me finish this thought.
All right.
Which is that for me coming in, I literally did not know that acupuncture was a licensed profession. So when I encountered it, I wanted to get a sense for like, wait a second. What is this profession? How does it connect to the profession in China? How does, et cetera. So I think that's one thing, is give people kind of a "you are here" marker, right? Like, here's the history of the profession. Here's the structures of the profession. Here's the conferences. Here's the journals. Here's the big teachers. Here's, and really just give people kind of an orientation in space and time, and then critical thinking skills. I mean, really. And I mean that both from a traditional Chinese perspective, right? And more going back to like Tao Te Ching and some of these foundational texts. How does the logic work? How does thinking work? How should we read those commentaries, right? What you were just saying, like with the Nanjing or any of the texts, like how do we actually engage those commentaries? How do we look at them, given that there's hundreds of years sometimes between commentators? So I think just that kind of stuff, the container, I obsess over that word, but like, I think the schools do a great job of instilling basic skills and knowledge about medicine. They do. I'm sorry. And I love all of y'all in schools, but I don't think they do a great job of helping people understand what the career is about and what the profession is about and how to engage that. I think there's a lot of room for improvement there.
This episode is brought to you by Jane, the clinic management software that honestly just makes running a practice easier. Let's dive into something that's never easy, but sometimes necessary: raising your fees. It can feel awkward, right? But here's a tip that can really help. Consider offering flexibility to your patients as you introduce the change. When patients face new fees, it's natural for them to feel uncertain or concerned. That's where flexibility can really make a difference. Offering options like a phased increase, suggesting a payment plan, or even taking a moment to talk things through can help to ease the transition. These thoughtful gestures show your patients that you're listening and care about them, which strengthens the trust you've worked so hard to build. If you're looking for more ideas on how to navigate these kinds of changes, head to frontdesk.jane.app and check out the article, How to Tell Clients You're Raising Your Fees. One last thing, if you're ready to give Jane a try, you can use the code CHIOLOGICAL for a 1-month grace period on your new Jane account. Well, we were just talking earlier in this conversation that it's very much in flux. It's a fast-growing profession. It's a rapidly changing profession. It's one of the things that drew you to it. When I first started doing this, I was just curious about learning acupuncture, and we didn't have all those options. Mm-hmm. So I really like your idea, especially as it is a more diverse and complex ecosystem right now, that we've got kind of a "you are here" marker, because it's always helpful to know where we are if there's somewhere else that we want to get to. You got to know where you are first.
Totally. And even to understand, I found it even at our school, it's kind of like very obsessed with history and all this kind of stuff. I found that a lot of students even got to their second and third year not really knowing even the history of the program or even who was really at the school, right? Like we had, at that time when I was a student, we had Ed Neal, Heiner Fruhoff, Arnover Sluice, we had all Hao Shengzhang, all these great Portland area practitioners and teachers. And a lot of people didn't understand the ecosystem. So they didn't understand, who are these people? Are they publishing? Are they doing research? Where were they trained? So I really feel like that, just placing ourselves and being like, okay, I'm at a school where the teachers all come from Chengdu. So what does that mean? Who founded the school of Chengdu? You know what I mean? Like there's all these things that I feel like, and again, I'm a philosopher and a historian first, really. And so those are the things that fascinate me, and so getting to know that for me was vital to my appreciation of myself as a practitioner of this medicine, understanding where I am in the stream of time and what effect I can have on the profession for the better. That was huge for me, especially in the second, third year.
That's an interesting question. What effect can I have on the profession? Because I think a lot of us get out and we think, well, I just want to make a living. Thinking about what kind of effect do I want to have on the profession, it makes me think about, I'm going to date myself here. John F. Kennedy gave a very famous speech once back in the early 60s. I can't remember what it was all about, but there's a very famous line about, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country.
Right.
I remember that. I was just like a little kid. That one, I don't know, it's just in there somewhere. But, similar thing. Not just what can acupuncture and Chinese medicine give to me, what do I have to offer to the stream of history? What do I have to offer to my community? What do I have to offer the guild, for that matter?
Yeah. And, and that, of course, there are folks, who are never, that question's never really going to resonate with them. I think there is a personality, thing to it as well. But yeah, I mean, it's, you can get really practical about it and say, if we're not involved, if we're not actively engaged with what's going on, as an herbalist, I could lose my whole formulary overnight. Right. So from a political standpoint, from that level, not that that's all we're talking about, but just saying that, knowing the history of FDA's incursion into the profession and having a sense of who's working on that. Is that a thing that we're paying attention to? Knowing that could threaten my survival. So even if you're talking to a person for whom, resonance with history and all that stuff is maybe not their focus, I think there's very practical reasons for us to be very engaged with our profession and aware of what's going on and what's not going on. From a more social perspective, maybe not. But I do think from political, and I talked a lot to students about that, is even if you don't care about whatever scholarship, even if you don't care about the profession at large or knowing anything about the history of the profession, think about your future. Think about 10 years from now when, your scope is snatched out from under you by another profession. You know what I mean? Yes. So it's those things, knowing those things and understanding, I think that's another role for schools is hey, how about a 1-credit class that's just all about what is going on from a legislative and sociopolitical point of view in the profession? That'd be cool. I'd teach that.
I think that's a great idea. You could even teach that postgraduate, now that I'm thinking about it. I mean, we've got our state profession, not state professions, but our state organizations. Every state has one. And a lot of folks are like, I'm not interested in politics. I'm not involved. Well, the nice thing about those guys is they are interested in politics. They are keeping an eye on legislation. They're keeping an eye on the things that protect the profession. So especially if you're not interested in politics, join your damn state organization, because those people are honed in on it and they help keep the wolf from the door.
And with the ASA now operational, trying to pull all the state associations together, that gives me personally even more confidence in giving my money to the state association, because I know that there's even a larger network. It's like I'm feeding up into the profession as a whole, in this country anyway, which feels pretty good.
So this comes up to something else that we had been talking about previously, which is community, right? We've been talking around it in this conversation so far. And I often hear acupuncturists talk about, oh yeah, I like being involved in community. I'm a part of a community. I want to be in community. And yet most of us are introverts. It's like, how do you have a community full of introverts?
Yeah. I mean, I think I was thinking about this before I talked to you, and I think if we really want to dig into it, we have to be a little bit more specific about what we're talking about, because community is such a vague kind of word, right? And people, like, just take myself as an example. I'm of course embedded in a variety of communities, right? So I have a lot of engagement with my family and my direct kind of that little community. But I live in a small town, and so as a business owner and an employer in a small town, like, we're probably one of the bigger employers. The truth is I'm embedded in that community. And so I'm really aware that there are folks that aren't engaging in kind of Chinese medicine community because they have so many other layers of community that they're trying to nurture. And you only have so much time. But I think, a big question is, how do you, because we're a relatively small profession, right? Like, if you look at the numbers within the United States, we're pretty scattered, right? Like, if you're not in one of the big cities where acupuncture is popular, there might only be 20 people in your nearby area that you can even engage with. So the physical access to community, professional community, I think, is different than, say, for a medical doctor, right? Like, as a medical doctor, you have a little bit larger pool of folks that you can draw from, unless you're important. But that's another story. So yeah, I think we really have to ask ourselves, first of all, what kind of community are we talking about here? It's a professional community, right? And when you have such a low concentration of folks within a geographic area, how do you build community in that context? So I think you and I talked a little bit about that. Like, okay, well, digital, that seems to be a good idea, right? Because you and I are talking. And the only reason we're doing that is not because we live in the same city, but because of these technologies.
Yes, we have these fantastic things called the internet. And actually,
so cool.
I live in a city where there's roughly 20 acupuncturists.
Oh, yeah.
I had more acupuncturists in my zip code in Seattle than we've got in the entire state of Missouri.
That's incredible.
It's really, yeah, it's the wild, wild west, except it's the Midwest. And one of the things that got me started with the podcast was looking for a way of feeding that desire to be connected to other people that are doing what I'm doing, not just in terms of, hey, I got this case to sort out, but as you were just saying, we're embedded in all kinds of community. We're embedded in all kinds of relationships. So just being connected to other people who are thinking similar thoughts, who are facing similar challenges, who are puzzling similar puzzles is just deeply helpful.
Yeah. It's, again, like, we're in a relatively new profession in this country, relatively sparse. And so even finding, like, for instance, let's say that you're a practitioner who moved back home to Missouri. Well, maybe not Missouri because you'd be there, but back home to Idaho. And that's where I'm from. So you wanted to go back and serve your community, and you go there and you're one of, 5 practitioners or something like that. Things come up in the first 5 years of practice, right? And it can be very hard. A lot of people really struggle. And some of the struggles are, like, very specific to our profession. Like, when you're the, local area snake oil salesman, how do you deal with that? Like, how do you deal with lack of respect in the community? How do you deal with really challenging patients who come to you with incredibly deep wounds and are revealing them to you, like, when you weren't trained to deal with that? Like, all this kind of stuff that comes up. Gosh, it'd be nice if there was a kind of active, nurturing, accessible source of community engagement so that you could go and feel safe to be like, oh my God, this happened to me today. And I was like, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this profession? Those types of things like that. I think about crisis a lot. Of course, community is for more than that. But I do feel like, boy, we get really isolated, and our introversion probably doesn't help that. But yeah, I mean, I agree. It's like we need that. It's not just about getting information. It's about getting that connection and that sense of like being part of something, I guess, bigger than us, for when we're feeling small.
I'm back to this guild idea again. I'm so glad you brought that word up, because it seems to me, when I imagine into guild, I'm thinking back hundreds of years. I'm thinking about times before the internet. I'm thinking about the communities of people across generations that are engaged in a similar practice. And we're just talking about, especially those first 5 years, it can often be challenging in many different ways. Having access to people who have been there and been through it and have grown from it, and maybe those problems of the past help turn them into the resilient practitioners they are today. Having the ability not even to talk medicine with someone like that, but simply to be with someone like that.
Yeah. And, I mean, we all, I think, have the experience. I was just talking to my wife the other day about, we have a couple of pairs of friends that we've both had since college, which was a while ago now. And just how nice it is to be able to sit with them, not even doing anything in particular, but just knowing we have this shared context. There are things I don't need to explain to you, and that I can just be with you in this space and feel nurtured by that, and just know that if I did need to talk about something, I could, that there would be that shared experience. So that would be great. And I will say that I think this is why, like, people love your podcast so much, and why whenever I write blog articles about these topics, they get so much interest, is because people are hungry for this kind of connection, and you bringing on some random dude from Astoria, Oregon to talk about his experiences. There are people out there, for whom that will be helpful, that they, but it would just be nice if it was a little bit more, if there was more, if there was more of this, if there was more of that engagement from more sources, that would be great. Not that your podcast is not enough, but it would be nice.
Well, the podcast is one voice. It's one small voice, and it's a voice. It's my curated voice. Who ends up on the podcast? Well, someone who kind of catches my attention somehow. I go, ooh, I'm going to talk to them.
Right.
But I'm just one person. I've just got one perspective.
Sure.
And I think, as you were saying, we have all these different communities these days. And the question that comes to my mind is, how can we help facilitate that, especially if we're not living in the same town?
Yeah.
Especially if we might not even know someone yet. How do we build those connections like you were just talking about? They go back decades, and they give a kind of I'm going to say it's like having a ballast on a ship. Because of that ballast, because of that deep thing that you've got that anchors you and centers you, right? You can survive storms. How to build that? How we create that? Because I look at the digital world, and I look at things like Twitter, and I go, oh, damn, man, I want to be the opposite of Twitter.
Yeah, man, this is, I mean, now, I'm a philosopher, okay? When we get into the world of actually how to do it, I'm not sure. But, I do think that, I will say to Twitter, I'm a big Twitter guy. I've been on Twitter since 2007. I love Twitter. It's my favorite social network. And I have actually made lots of professional connections. In fact, one of my most important professional connections ever with Brant Stickley was made on Twitter. And he ended up coming out to NUNM, and we've been friends ever since. So I think there's diverse communication strategies work for different people in different situations. But here's the thing. There has to be, I mean, I will say that for me, if there's no in-person connection ever, I find it hard, to sustain the type of connection that is suggested in what we've been talking about, and so like conferences, right? In most professions, there's these big conferences that everybody goes to, even if they don't want to go. And of course, in COVID times, this is a more complicated conversation. But let's pretend that just for a minute that doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I've been to a couple conferences. I've been to a couple of the big conferences, and I'm sorry, I found them lacking. I found that they did not seem to learn from what other professions have done and tried and sometimes failed and sometimes succeeded. It was like it kind of just became like a place for companies to hawk their products, and less about, there was no social piece. It was just like lectures and the exhibition hall, and that was it. And so, finding the way to, could we have a huge national, even like the APA, the American Philosophical Association, they do East, Central, West, right? So there's a conference and it rotates through regions. Could we do something like that? Has that been tried and I just don't know about it? That kind of thing, so that's something I think about. That would be an easy thing, right? That would be a relatively easy thing to do because there's a model there. And can you imagine if it was the case that even not undergrads, but our students who are in their first professional degree, if they went to these conferences and they saw the great diversity of books and, speakers and people in the profession. So that's one thing that brings to mind, events, conferences, those types of things, not because they are a community, but because they can become kind of Tinder for community. Because you and I meet at a conference, we have a couple drinks after a session, we really connect. And that could become a book. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You know what I mean? That's what I see in other professions. And if you research the history of professions, that's one of those things. There's always these key events that kind of catalyze the community flourishing.
So a couple thoughts on that. And I just want to stick a pin in Twitter because I want to come back to it. Because we're like opposites on that. And I'd love to know more about what you're thinking about it, because I'm always up for learning more about something, especially that I've had a bad attitude about. So I'm going to stick a pin in that. We're going to come back to it, okay? I want to talk about conferences, though, for a second. And I think this touches in on community. I have heard from lots of people while I've been doing this podcast that people like it because they feel, I'm using air quotes here, connected to community.
Right.
Which is cool.
Yeah.
I'm not exactly sure what it means, which is partly why we're having this conversation, but I hear it. And so it's in the back of my mind. I think about it. Wow. All right, we're connecting with community. I don't know what that means necessarily, but I hear it a lot. And I'm somehow involved in it, which is curious because I'm an introvert. So
right.
why would I reach out to do that? But it seems to be happening. So there's that piece. I had some friends a couple years back who said, Michael Max, you need to put on a conference for people that listen to the podcast. And my first thought was, oh, shit. I don't know anything about that. And,
right. Do I have to do this? Jeez.
Exactly. And I don't like managing things like that. That just sounds awful. We need to find someone who can do all that stuff. But the idea was there, and I toyed with it. And I was at a class, an acupuncture class, and there were a bunch of us that were out for dinner one night. And we're talking and, drinking and, all the things that you were just talking about that create that sense of community and create connections, Tinder, if you will, for new projects and ideas. And I thought, I'm gonna do a quick little marketing survey here. Let's see if anyone's interested in this. And so I asked people. It's like, if we did a conference for people that listen to the podcast, right? Because you guys feel like it makes you connect with community. And everyone's like, yeah, I'm connected to community. Cool. If I did a conference, or if we did, because I would need help with this, a conference for Qiological listeners, would you come? There were 10 people there. One person halfway raised their hand.
Reluctantly.
And my first thought was, thank God I'm off the hook.
Right.
But the other thing that comes up is, okay, I'm hearing on one hand, people want to be in community and they feel through the podcast that they are. But and this might just be a factor of my age, because I'm more an in-person guy. But when I was offering something, how about we do this in person together, nobody was interested. Now, this is just one group of 10 people and they'd had a drink or two, but still, it raises the question for me, in the digital age, in the internet-mediated time that we live in, what is community?
Yeah. And I think that's that does get back to Twitter in some ways. I think it's not static, right? So we're defining it as we go, and it's evolving along with these technologies in a way like it has been forever, right? So back, you hardly left your home village, right? So your connections to folks were very much immediate and in person and verbal or physical. And then it's gone out since then, to where sometimes, you might only have a phone relationship with somebody, and then it's gone even further. So I think, we could probably look to history and learn a little bit there and get a sense. But I just want to speak to the events thing because I think you're not the only person to have that experience where you feel like there's a head of steam, some interest in an idea, and then you poll people and they're like, yeah, I don't think so. And why that is, I think is an interesting question. But I do think that this will have to be cultivated, right? So it's not like I'm going to say, hey, we're going to have a conference and everybody's just going to be like, all right, I'll be right there. It's like you have to, because conferences can be freaking terrible. Like they can be so bad and like so boring and so expensive. And so I think it would be about defining and maybe using the word conference as a bad start, right? Whatever we want to call it, an event. Like we have to figure out like what does our community need? What kinds of interchanges I would say no matter what, we need to have a social layer there where people are going out, individually, but also like, hey, those meet and greets are painful for some of us, but for some people, that's really how they meet folks, right? So creating a variety of environments, like an ecosystem, a social ecosystem where people can find their place, and then having kind of centralized events, whether those are talks, whether those are whatever qigong, whether they're demonstrations, whether they're hikes in nature, like whatever it is, I don't know, but you have to create the container for folks, and I think we'd have to. I'm now enlisting you in this. Can you see that? Really explain to people why it's valuable, right? Like I think it is going to be a challenge because of what you have mentioned a couple of times, which is that our profession is filled with introverts. I mean, I don't know what the percentage would be. I'm always stunned when I meet a super extroverted acupuncturist. It's like, whoa, man, like chill out, like, so I think I'm not saying that you're going to say, oh, we're making a conference and people are going to flood to it. But I think for me, it's kind of become my obsession to find ways to contribute to the evolution of this profession in this way, trying to make those spaces for the kinds of conversations that I think will make our profession more lasting and more valuable for our communities. So my point just being that I think community is not something that it just emerges naturally, but it's something that is created through the efforts of people like you and me, and it takes time and it takes adjustment, and it takes diversifying the voices behind it. I wouldn't want you and I to create a conference like this, just you and me, two white bald dudes. You know what I mean? Like I would want to bring like some young folks and some even older folks and some people with, different geographical representations, like somebody from the South, like you'd want to bring together and really talk about like, how can we create a space for the flourishing of the community of this profession? And those conversations would be difficult sometimes, right? But I think it'd be valuable. I think it'd be worth it.
Having a thriving, profitable practice is one of the most healing things you can do as a healthcare practitioner, because a robust business is the ultimate expression of vital chi, and that's the heart of our medicine. I'm Julie Bairdontlock, and I help practitioners grow nourishing, profitable, authentic businesses that embody the generative cycle of Chinese medicine. This isn't about all yang all the time. It's about expanding your own internal capacity, growing collaborative relationships with your patients for ethical patient retention, and marketing as an extension of this medicine, not a necessary evil. You already know that everything is connected in your patients' lives and bodies. The same is true for your business. When we align your systems, your schedule, your pricing, and your offerings with you, we create flow, which means more spaciousness, more impact, and more joy. When you are in the flow, fully resourced in terms of chi, time, and money, your business becomes a source of healing, not just for your patients, but for you. Let's grow something rooted, radiant, and real. Visit lifeflowconsulting.com to learn more.
Well, when I think of conferences myself, I mean, I'm kind of like Groucho Marx, right? I don't want to belong to any club that would have me.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
I'm kind of the same way. Like, conference, do I want to go to that? Well, a lot of
Yeah.
people, it takes time. I got to travel. Do I even want to go to the place?
I know it's expensive.
Do I have to eat hotel food? Oh, God. So, all that aside, and it's fun to have these conversations, and especially to think about like doing things that you would never think about doing, like introvert putting on a conference. Seriously, that's a job for someone else. It's not for me. But you bring something up, and I think this is really germane and perhaps very potentially helpful that we have the internet. How do we create experiences? How do we create connection? How do we create the circumstances where that Tinder that you talked about is present so that the people that are a part of whatever that event is have an opportunity to be catalyzed by it so that something in them sparks. Maybe it's an idea that they get for themselves that they go out and do. Maybe it's a connection that they make and a partnership is formed, or a project is born, or business comes into fruition. That's the thing that's got my attention. How to create those like Tindery moments.
Yeah, and we I obsessed over the conference angle and the in-person angle, even though I too am very introverted in that way. But we can ask the same questions of a digital experience. It's just that it's going to be a different conversation. How do you, like with the podcast, you've got your membership program and you have, website, you have space for people to interact. I think you have some kind of a forum space.
I've got a forum space for the acupuncture.
Okay.
And we're looking to do some expansion with that as well, but that's future.
So, there's that so my point being just that, like, how can you grow that container and the container of this podcast in a way that builds on the great success you've had in generating an energy of community, but then kind of include those elements that maybe you feel are missing or that you would like to build upon. I've had the number of online forums that I've tried to sustain is truly astonishing, probably like 50 or something like that. And, so I've tried lots of different things, but I've only recently become very interested in sustained effort. Like before I would get discouraged, I would try to do something, I would get discouraged because there wouldn't be a lot of engagement. But now I feel so passionate about creating this, helping to contribute to this sense of community that I'm just sticking with it, and I'm starting to look at the way other communities have bridged this gap. I have connection to a couple of folks who run very robust online communities for their professions, and just trying to get a sense for like, how did you do that? How did you create that? And trying to leverage those lessons for our community. So I think it's possible, we can do it digitally, and we kind of have to right now, so it's a good opportunity. It's forcing us all to really look at digital technologies and say, what can they do?
Absolutely. And the thing that you say about persistence, I think is very, very important. It does take time. It does take effort. It takes effort over time. It's easy to start things. Keeping it going is another question. And then there also is a question, at what point do you say, this isn't going to go anywhere? This is done.
Yeah, I know. That's difficult. That's a very difficult question. And you're right. And it's not just sustaining it. It's sustaining it with little or no feedback, right? Because especially at first, I don't know how your podcast went, but at first it takes a while, just like a business, like a brand new acupuncturist in most communities, most markets, it takes a little while, right? For people to get to know who you are and for people to even know that you're there on the street and stuff like that. So I think that I've had a couple students who have tried to start things and have gotten really, really discouraged because they didn't get feedback within 6 months or something like that. So I do think persistence is key. And I think probably the persistence question is a little bit more important than the when to kill it question, because I don't think many of us get to that point, to trying it for long enough. So, but it's true. Like when do you stop? I don't know. That I don't know. But
that idea that you don't go far enough, that you stop because you ran out of fuel or you ran out of interest, that's still a choice to kill it.
Yeah.
In the podcast business, they call it pod fade, right? Oh, look, one a week, one a month, one
Yeah.
every, wait, it's been
Quarter.
quarter. Yeah.
Once a year. Yeah, and I think also one of the things about digital technologies is that it makes publishing incredibly easy.
Super easy.
And so, back in the day, if you got a radio program like this, you would stick with it. You know what I mean? Because it would be incredibly difficult for you to get into. It's like a whole thing. I don't know what you did. I don't know if you took any classes about podcasting or anything like that. But when I started my podcast, I used my iPhone headphones and plugged them into my computer and recorded it. And that was my podcast. And so I think we have to expect and maybe even accept or even support the fact that some things are just going to come in and out of existence just as people are experimenting. But something like your podcast, for instance, like you've built a serious structure here. You've built a serious asset. If I started to see you start to fade, I would be up in your face. I would be like, "Hey, what's going on? Like, how's this doing?" Because this is really something that should be sustained because you've had such incredible success. So I think, it depends. I mean, I'm not going to be mad at people because they drop their podcast, but at the same time, it's like the more voices we have, what if we had 20 Chinese medicine podcasts to listen to? Well, I wouldn't have time, but
Right.
it would be amazing. It would be incredible. Like that would be I would value that so much in my teaching, like being able to like you just did that podcast about home practice.
Mm.
Do you know how long I've been waiting for somebody to like write a book or do something related to home practice because I teach it, but then I want another resource. So what if we had 10, 20 podcasts all on diverse subjects? Teachers would benefit, individuals would benefit, everybody would benefit. So I want to encourage anybody listening, like if you have any inkling of interest in starting something up, even if you're not sure you want to sustain it forever, I think the more voices, the better.
I would agree. I think the more voices, the better. And something else, and I had this on a recent podcast with somebody who was on, the bar to entry is almost zero. It's almost zero. You could get away with your Apple earbuds. Actually, Apple earbuds the Bluetooth ones don't sound good. Hey kids, if you're going to do a podcast, don't use the anything with Bluetooth because the compression makes the sound horrible. You want something wired. But here's the deal. You could start off with a microphone that cost you $80. You could buy podcast hosting services for like $10 a month. Don't use the free ones, but you could buy them for $10 a month, and then you put in some time, and you're like good to go.
Yeah, it's easy.
For under a couple $100, you could have a little podcast studio.
Yeah, and the podcast services, like they publish it for you, and like it like when I started, it's like you had to do everything manually, and it was this huge pain. And now it's just easy. It's so easy.
It's not difficult. I'm going to say it's not difficult. If you haven't done it, it may not feel easy because you haven't done it yet.
Sure.
But the bar to entry is super low. It's a very democratic type of technology as far as I'm concerned, because anybody who's got something to say can put their voice out there and say it. And like we were just talking about, the more diverse an ecosystem is, the stronger it is. And different people need to hear different things. I didn't know until I was just talking with you in this moment that there's interest in people doing home practices. I had no idea.
Oh yeah.
I may need to do a follow-up on that podcast.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, in my university teaching, of the things that were requested, that was the number one that
Seriously?
I didn't have because it would never occur to me to practice out of my home because I am very specific about my home space. But like other people, and I know that I know about your situation because of that podcast. It's like people with kids, that's a very common one. People who are stay-at-home parents and would like to combine the two. And yeah, there's huge interest and there's so little information out there about it, both the kind of the issues you brought up, but then also just kind of logistical things, of like how many patients can I see and, all that kind of stuff. But yeah,
Cool.
There's huge interest.
Well, I will do a follow-up to that.
Good.
Yeah. And and anyone listening to this, if you would like, let me put it this way, maybe I'll do a follow-up. If you're listening to this and you're thinking, I'd like to know more, send me an email, right? I get enough emails, I'll be happy to do it. I want to come back to Twitter. You love Twitter. And every time I've attempted to get on, I within just a few minutes, I'm like rageful at what people are saying and how just to me it seems like disrespectful people can be to each other, and just I mean it just seems like it's like a barroom brawl to me. So tell me how this could be a useful way to connect with people and do some good in the world. I would love to have another perspective. I really would.
Yeah, and just like all the social networks, your mileage may vary just because different folks have different interests. Part of the thing is, I think a bar room, like think of a real big tavern bar room. I think it's actually a good metaphor in the sense that always in one of those big. I'm thinking right now of this very specific pub in Portland that has a huge like warehouse style main room. And in that room, there will be like a bunch of drunk people, like almost in a brawl in one part. And then in the corner, you'll see like a couple having a romantic date. And then over here, a group of people who look like they're studying something paradoxically, despite the noise. And so in the same way, Twitter is like this huge room full of a bunch of people, and some of them are real jerks and run their mouth all the time. But you can find corners. So I've been on there since the beginning pretty much. And so I've cultivated my streams incredibly tightly. So I don't interact with just Twitter. I interact with the practitioners I know who are on Twitter, which are few and far between, I will say. The majority of people I interact with are like philosophers and historians and stuff like that. So there's a lot of scholars on Twitter actually, and there's a lot of good interaction there. So I mean, it's like anything. Like you can use the tool, and the tool contains features that allow you to avoid some of the negativity and stuff like that. What I like about it most is that it's not personal. So I don't do Facebook because I find it very distressing to see my old friends or old classmates descending into right-wing authoritarianism, right? So the personal nature of Facebook actually, as an introvert and as a person with my specific psychological makeup, I find that really difficult to handle. Whereas Twitter, when I get the troll that comes by or see some person like espousing some weird view, I can just mute them and they're just gone, right? And I didn't know them anyway. So it's just like some random dude shouting on the street. So it doesn't bother me. So you know what I mean? It's like, I think it's just different folks have different desires. I find it a great way just to kind of quickly get a sense for these different, like I'll just quickly look at the philosophy list that I have, and I'll get a sense for kind of like, what is philosophy Twitter talking about today? It's just, I just find it very engaging in that way, but it does not work for everyone.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And maybe I will give that a try. You just have to really curate
start an
the
account
feed.
and come and follow me.
Okay. Well, I think I have an account. I just haven't opened it up in a long time.
Yeah, I mean, there's some terrible stuff on Twitter, but I will say, in the last 2 years, it's gotten a lot better. They put a lot of controls in to get rid of some of the fake accounts. Like there was a huge purge last year, and the quality of my stream increased a lot. So I'm not saying you will have a different experience, but I will say that I feel like there's a lot less just like random meanness and like ugly stuff that happens, even in my streams. So yeah, I'd be happy to talk to you about it more, and share my lists with you, because then you might get a sense for it.
All right. I will look for you on Twitter. And for people that do like Twitter, can they contact you on Twitter that are listening?
They can. And that's funny because I just changed my account name. It's not Eric Gray. So that's the thing. I do have a personal account, and you can follow that if you want. But if you are sensitive to political conversations, I would not do that. My business account is called Health, capital H, Health Deepest, capital D. So Health Deepest instead of Deepest Health, because that's all I could get. And I'd be happy to share with anybody who's on Twitter the lists that I follow of practitioners, if they're like, who do I follow? How do I use this? So yeah, find me there.
All right. That's helpful. I want to come back, and I feel like we started with this, but then we've sort of taken a long, wide left turn, which I often do. But we were talking originally about like having a successful, resonant, and enjoyable professional life. I feel like we've touched on a number of different things, but I want to come back to that for a moment. And I mean, so often when I think about having a practice, like you were saying, it's something you want to do your whole life. It's kind of like a life adventure, and it's such a deep commitment. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about the kind of mindset that's helpful to cultivate to set out on this. I mean, there's always the like, oh, do this or don't do that kinds of things. But beyond that, and I'm asking a philosopher here, so I can ask this question. What kind of mindsets are helpful? Perspectives, approaches?
That's a big question. Well, any answer I give is obviously going to be biased by where I'm at, but I'm thinking right now of my students that I've seen be most successful, and by successful I mean that they're still in the profession and they love it and they're growing in it, and it's an engine of good in their life. They definitely share certain features, I would say, and one of those is basically an openness to lifelong learning, a belief that you don't know. I think the greatest danger on graduation is believing you know what you're talking about. And because you go into medicine not with your eyes open to being taught by nature and by your patients, but you go in with protocols and ideas about the way medicine should be, and you impose those on your patients, right? So I think being open and saying, like, I learned, like you said, you've got your learner's permit. That's cool. It's cool you've got your learner's permit, but now it's time to learn, and so I think just having that openness and being not just open to, but actively cultivating a diversity of information and understanding. So that's one thing for me, both medically, but then also professionally, right? In the sense of like, what am I going to do with my life? So that's one thing. And I think the other thing that I see being important for folks is, I don't know quite how to say this, but an appreciation for the fact that our profession is one that touches your entire life, right? My body is my instrument, right? Like when I do acupuncture, which I don't do as much anymore, but especially when I'm doing acupuncture, these fingers, this body, this channel is my equipment, right? It is like my needles are an extension of me. The treatment I do is an extension of my life energy, or the energy I'm, however you want to talk about it, whatever. But the cultivation of yourself, the care and keeping of yourself, and the appreciation of the medicine as something that can teach you in every part of your life, I think is, I've just seen that people because some people don't want to do that with their profession, right? Like there are people who I've taught students who really resist this idea because they want to put this division between work and life, right? They want to believe that like they can practice their thing over here, but then they can live their life and do whatever they want and just be, live this whole separate existence over here. Maybe, but I find the people who have that resonance and that deep sense of satisfaction in their career, no matter how much money they're making, they let the medicine transform them, and they let and I will say, and I hesitate a little bit to say this, but I think it's what we owe the profession. That JFK quote is a good one, because for me, and I'm just going to speak for myself, being classically oriented and having connection to a lineage, a very direct connection to a lineage, I feel an incredible sense of humility that I have been allowed to access this tradition that does not come from my culture, and that I would not have known if it wasn't for the way our society has developed. It's like, this doesn't come from me, but I have been graciously accepted into it. And I want to do everything I can to respect it, and to respect it with my whole self. And so for me, the tradition I learned, the lineage I learned, you let the medicine affect you, so, and you let it be part of the fabric of your life. This does not mean you have to be a freaking monk, right? it doesn't mean like what, there's so many things it doesn't mean, but what it does mean is that when I wake up in the morning, the principles of Chinese medicine are in my mind, and I use them to interact with the world around me. And that, I think, makes me a better practitioner. So those are the things. Those are the main things that I think like really let people enter the profession, and really allows them to kind of engage with it in a way that is, frankly, productive of good profits too. So not just all the nice things, but also cash money, which some people like.
Well, cash money is very helpful. It allows us to be able to do the work that we do,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
And buy new microphones.
buy new microphones, especially if you're a microphone geek. I mean, think about it, like Qigong, right? Something as simple as Qigong, you're paying attention to your breath, bringing in what needs to be brought in for nourishment, exhaling what you don't need. How is running a business any different than that when you think about it? Any work that we want to do in the world, if we're going to do it in an ethical way, we have to make sure it's sustainable. You brought something up. It's been in the back of my mind. You were saying that I've got this kind of asset here. And if I was to like say, hey, I'm going to disappear, see y'all, you said you'd be up in my face.
Yes.
Okay. That's good to know.
I would.
It's good to know. It's good to know I've got those kind of friends.
If I see you do the monthly, the monthly, quarterly, then yeah. Yeah. I mean, because I think sometimes you're doing it, you're fading because you don't think anybody cares, right?
Well, there's all kinds of reasons for fading. That could be one of them.
Of course.
But my point here is that for anything to be sustainable, we have to make sure that we are tending to it. There's an archaic word called husbandry, which means taking good care of resources. Stewardship is another way to say it.
Yeah.
Taking good care of resources, and especially because we are the instrument in the work that we do. That includes taking care of ourselves. That is not selfishness. That is taking care of something very essential. That's part of our practice.
Yeah.
Which includes our business, which includes our medicine, which includes our relationships. Practice. I think practice with a capital P. I often talk about, at least this is true for me, thinking about the practice of my practice.
Yeah.
It's not just a business. Business is a piece of it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's absolutely. Yeah. And caring for your business, for the actual business pieces, right? The nuts and bolts and all the things that make the business with a capital B, if you will. Mm-hmm. Those things too, they need to be cared for and tended, right? All of it needs to be cared for and tended. And I think that's sometimes why people disconnect from some aspects of this, is because it's a little overwhelming, right? Like when it's like, oh, great, I have to do this, and now I have to care for my profession too. I do think that's where our traditions can really feed us and keep us from overwhelm. We can keep balanced. I mean, there's yin and yang, right? It's not all action. Sometimes you gotta rest. Sometimes you gotta step back, and that's okay too.
Absolutely. And what you said about waking up in the morning and you have the principles of the medicine in your mind. If these principles really are true, that they come from nature, then they would be useful to us, not just in our medical work, but in the rest of our lives. We should be able to see those reflections.
Yeah. That's the whole foundation of everything I teach in business. Like all the courses are set around the organ systems and the interplay of the 5 phases and all that kind of stuff, because you know what? I started to use those structures in my business to help me when I wasn't sure what was going on or why I wasn't doing well or whatever.
Yeah.
And it worked. And why did it work? Because those principles come from nature and they're true in the sense that they're true.
Yes. Well, and that's something else I wanted to talk with you about, but we're a little bit out of time. So maybe we can come back another day and
sure,
delve more, take a more granular look at that stuff that you're doing and that you're teaching. That would be fun.
Oh yeah, sure.
All right. Eric, anything else to say before we say goodbye for this moment?
No, just that I'm glad people are listening, because, that's the start of community right there. So, listening to different people's perspectives, hearing them, taking them in, thinking about them, responding, that's the beginning. So thanks to everybody for listening.
One of the things I most love about having my own business is the freedom to do what I want to do without having to ask anyone's permission. Talk about wealth. The ability to choose how you spend your day is not just a richness in life, it's also an opportunity to create the kind of world that you want to live in. You know, in some ways, running your own business is one of the most powerful things you can do to promote systemic change because you are manifesting your vision bit by bit every day in the service of how you would like the world to be. Consider that running a successful business based on your values just might be the ultimate in bringing about change. Well, that's it for today, friends. I hope that you have found this time we've spent today to be worth the hour or so of your life that you've invested here. Money is one thing, but the time we spend doing things, that is where the richness in life is. Well, here we are at the end of this episode. If you've listened up to this point, you're either a rabid fan of Cheological or the forward button on your podcast player stopped working. If you are indeed a fan of the podcast, you can help us to bring new episodes to our community of practitioners by supporting us with a membership or a one-time contribution. Details, of course, are on the website. That's it for today, friends. Join us again next Tuesday for another thoughtful episode of Cheological.